Hi, this is Jeffrey Wernick. I'm here only with Ryan today so far. Bruce is taking longer than he expected, and he planned to be in a deposition. And Dennis is also seemingly tied up. And each will try and make themselves available sometime during this podcast if they have the opportunity to. So meanwhile, for today, it will be Ryan and myself. So first, Ryan, I hope you had a good Thanksgiving.
You too, Jeffrey. Thank you.
So yes,
apologize for my casual tire this morning. It's about 50 degrees in here. I forgot to turn my heater on. So
I hope you got it turned on now so you get warmed up. But Ryan, what I'm reminded of in whenever we see the blame game in politics, and I think how destructive the blame game is, we have this tragic shooting of the National Guard in D.C. Apparently, we had a Afghani refugee who served alongside us, I think, for about 10 years in Afghanistan. Would have assumed that the CIA and the people there in Afghanistan would have done some vetting of who they allied themselves with, and it was not a brief relationship; it was a long-term relationship. And what have we learned? First, we see an interview where. And I'm trying to get to the point. This is going back to the theme that we talk about so frequently, is the debasement of language. So what do we have? We first have a complaint about this person basically not being vetted at all, and it was Biden's failed exit from Afghanistan. And when someone asked Trump, if why does he keep blaming Biden for the shooting? Basically, I think Trump called the person stupid and insulted the person. And subsequent to that, what did we find out? Is that actually this person in April of this year, by the Trump administration, was granted asylum. So we would have assumed that they would have and I'll play this video in a second that you just put up. We would have assumed that during the process of granting asylum, that this administration would have done their own due diligence before granting asylum. You have an administration that claims Biden did no vetting of anyone. So if you're getting an asylum application and you've already made statements over and over and over and over and over again that the Biden administration was a complete disaster, the worst administration in the history of the country, that they did absolutely no vetting, wouldn't you think that before they granted asylum, that they would then begin doing vetting? And wouldn't you think that if asylum was granted during this period of time, so the last authorization that allowed this person to remain in the country, okay, was done by the Trump administration, and apparently they have no sense of responsibility. I'll play this and I'll get into a little longer rant on this, but let me add to the stage what you just put up there.
Why do you blame the Biden administration?
Because they let him in. Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person? Because they came on a plane along with thousands of other people that shouldn't be here, and you're just asking questions because you're a stupid person. And there's a law passed that it's almost impossible not to get them out. You can't get them out once they come in.
Now, to be just to save us time, he basically rambles borderline incoherently for the rest of that statement. That was the bulk of the point right there. I was just backing up what you showed or what you said. To me, it's just desperation. To your point, I mean, obviously, I agree with you what you said. The point is really that, it's both administration's fault, if anybody's at fault. And this is just an effort to pin it on one side, even though it's obvious that they played a factor in the asylum in 2025. It's pretty sad. But go ahead if your follow-up point.
The fortunate thing to me is, again, the debasement of language and the fact that we really can't have and this is partisanship makes people morons.
Yep.
So anyone who's a hyper partisan, very partisan, loses their objectivity, and they only look at one side of the argument, not both sides of the argument. And so by definition, if you only look at one side of the argument and not both sides of the arguments, you're an idiot. Okay. So smart people look at both sides of an argument, not only one side of an argument.
I would even add, which I'm sure you're saying the same, all sides of the argument, right? Like not just in every possible perspective, which I agree.
So I want to recount as quickly as I can the facts about Afghanistan. Okay. Facts. Okay. Fact one, Trump signed a deal with the Taliban, okay, to have a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan. Trump signed a deal with the Taliban that did not include the Afghani government without consultation with the Afghani government. So Trump decided he was representing Afghanistan, and he was turning over Afghanistan to the Taliban. And that turnover date was supposed to be, as long as everybody complied with the terms and conditions of that agreement, was supposed to be May of 2021. Okay. Now, Trump, at that point in time he signed the agreement, he had all the confidence that he was going to win an election and still be president at that point in time, and that he would be turning over Afghanistan to the Taliban. So now let's look at what happened during that period of time. Okay, now the Afghani government knows it's gone, okay, in the middle of 2021. Okay, so they basically are a lame duck administration the moment Trump signed that agreement. Okay, the moment he signed that agreement, they became lame ducks. Okay, how hard do you think the military is going to fight, knowing they're not going to have money in a period of time either? And while they're watching the U.S. withdraw, the Taliban were not in compliance with all the terms and conditions, and the U.S. did nothing about the lack of compliance. Pretty much the message from the Trump administration was, as long as you leave American troops alone, we're okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what had happened is the Taliban turned their focus on the Afghani military effort. And what's the incentive for the Afghani military to fight? They're fighting for what? They're giving over the country to the Taliban, in May. Doesn't anybody think and use common sense?
Well,
okay, by the time Biden came into office, the security situation had already deteriorated, to a terrible point that either to preserve it, you were not going to then recruit more Afghanis to fight, because in just a few months you're going to go up. There's no enthusiasm from the Afghani government. So the only thing the U.S. could have done at that point in time is accelerated withdrawal, or send more troops back in.
One quick point, I'll let you continue. Let's not forget, the Taliban was the very focal point for why the U.S. government claimed they were there to begin with. That's just ridiculous. Add to how stupid all this is. And both administrations, in their own ways, have, a further step back, I think the Taliban is not what it appears to be. I don't think they've ever truly been fighting it the way they claimed, and I think that shows that now. But continue.
Yeah. So you have a situation where, could the withdrawal, and so now you have Trump expecting to be president, knowing that he's basically ignored all the non-compliance since they were not targeting American troops. He keeps saying he would have kept that air base, but he only said that after Biden was president and Biden was gone. So while of that, is there any evidence at all, given the fact that Trump left office in January with a commitment to be out by May, a commitment he signed onto? Okay, is there any evidence that he left Biden a plan? When they were thinking about how to, supposedly we have a number between 70,000 to 90,000 Afghanis came as refugees, because of their supporting our efforts for 10, 20 years, however many years we were there.
This guy was a part.
Efforts, so you would assume that once you made an effort that we're leaving, you would assume that somebody would start making a list of who worked with us that we need to start vetting now for refugee status. You would have assumed that they would have started that process. So to be fair to Biden, he came in at the end of January, had to be out in May, and he had to plan the exits, put together which refugees needed in all that period of time, because apparently absolutely none of that effort was done, or at least we have no evidence that it was done, by the Trump administration. And if it was done, he certainly not talked about it. Okay, for a guy that brags about everything, he didn't say anything about it. And again, I don't want to let Biden off the hook, okay? But Biden came in a very difficult situation, and Trump left him in that very difficult situation. Whether Trump could have done better than Biden, we don't really know the answer. Everybody always says after the fact, I could have done better. That's very easy to say those words, but we do know is that this is a fact that the security situation significantly deteriorated. And we should have known after 20 years where we were trying to prevent the Taliban to take power, and that was the reason why we were there, that instead of preventing them, we handed it over to them. That don't we think we had any moral obligation to the people who we just completely abandoned?
Right.
Okay.
But see, this is where, so that is a very fair perspective from, if and I'm not saying we know for sure one or the other, there is a partisan kind of a battle going on within this. But my perspective, and I tend to stand back and look at this as it makes it much more simple to think about the vetting under the context that they never really even tried. That if you stand back and look at the rest of the pictures, like Israel funding Hamas, or is it the United States and Israel and UK funding terrorists in Syria or Afghanistan. The point is that in most of these circumstances, you can find the U.S. government and other governments included, but the focal point being U.S. at this point, funding and working with the very groups they otherwise pretend to be fighting, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. So in this case, I think it's more simplified by realizing that we can get into the zero units, which were the group this guy was a part of, and the 70,000 was that was the group he came in through in regard to immigration. But they worked for these zero units in Afghanistan with the CIA that were, human rights groups around the world were calling them out for killing civilians, for just human rights violations. And these were the groups that were run and supported by the U.S. government. And so if you stand back and look at all that, they knew he was doing this. They were funding him doing that, the very things they claim they're fighting elsewhere. So I think it's more nuanced than they didn't vet him, which I do think is part of it. Maybe because they don't want to look too hard, but more so that neither administration wanted to vet or look too hard because of what it was. Now, for whatever reason, it blew back up in their face. And so Trump is trying to pin it on Biden. But it's the whole of government, foreign policy disaster they've been doing for my entire life. So I think that makes it a little more simple. But within the two-party divide, I'm sure you're absolutely right that there is an effort, that ultimately there was an effort to sort of pin that disaster on Biden, and he did what he could within it. But if you stand back and look at the full foreign policy picture, let me put it this way. Why wouldn't have Biden have basically tried to call that out? Why wouldn't they be saying that now? I think it's because all of them want this to sort of go away because it ties back to a bigger government problem,
And all I want is an intelligent conversation.
Absolutely.
That's all I want is intelligent, honest conversation, not just finger pointing.
Yes.
When nobody, it's very simple. All Trump's fault, all Biden's fault. What do we learn from that? We learn absolutely nothing. Maybe people like to feel better because that's a simple world for them. The simple world is for simple-minded people.
Yeah, I think that's the crux of it, Jeffrey. I think it makes the world easier and digestible for people who don't want to think too hard into it.
Yeah. So Trump can make all the claims he wants to make, but the reality is there's no evidence that he would have done any better. And maybe he would have, but maybe he wouldn't have. So we don't really know. Would he have been able to keep the airbase? We don't know, because the reality was the security situation was very deteriorated. So we don't know what the military would have said. If you want to keep the airbase, what's involved in keeping the airbase? Okay. So was there there doesn't seem to have ever been that conversation. So since apparently Trump never planned the exit, even though the exit was 5 months away from his last day in office, again, no evidence of any planning. That seems to be pretty irresponsible. Okay.
A very simple, one more simple way to look at it. I find it hard to believe this would be the only thing, but it could just be simply that Trump wanted to have that standing out in the, for his administration to claim that they pulled out of Afghanistan and nothing else mattered. The people, U.S. citizens, investment, that seems to line up with Trump more than anything else. But I would argue there's more than that, but that makes sense.
And I ask people, look, I'm not letting Biden off the hook, but people died upon our exit. Could somebody have done it better? I don't really know whether somebody could have done better. Of course, there's this reputation that Biden is just an idiot and everybody in the military is just an idiot and they just don't know how to do this type of things. And you can make the assumption they just don't know how to do it. Or did really the situation just get out of control and they had to make a decision? Do we send more troops back in? or do we just try and under the imperfect circumstances get them out? So it's very easy. It's very easy to do Monday, morning quarterbacking. But the reality is Trump delivered a horrible situation to Biden. Okay. He did. Okay. That should be an indisputable fact of what the circumstances were the day Biden took his oath of office. And then you take a look at Trump, people say, yes, 13 people died. And that's a tragedy that 13 people died, that day of the exit. How many people died during the Trump administration when he could have, the day he walked into office, he could have given Taliban Afghanistan? So how much money did Trump spend and how many Americans died during those 4 years of the Trump's administration? For what? What was accomplished? He could have day one gone in and said, this is a mistake, I'm getting out. Okay. So what did he know 4 years after that he didn't know year one when he ran in 2016 on getting out of Afghanistan? So for whatever reason, he decided once he got in the office, he wasn't going to get out. I don't know what he thought he was going to accomplish, but he left Afghanistan in a worse shape than he came in. I mean, that's also a fact. Afghanistan was in a worse shape in 2020 than it was in 2016. And he inherited a bad situation from Barack Obama, who inherited a bad situation from George Bush. I mean, so I don't want to just put this just on Trump, is that people, but people owned their decision the day they took office. It was no longer what the other person did. It's what they did with what they inherited. Okay. So what we know what Trump did with what he inherited. Trump basically said, I'm going to stay 4 years, spent a lot of money. I think the number is somewhere between 40 and 50 Americans died during those period of time. More than. So we can sit back and say during the Biden administration, less people died in Afghanistan than the Trump administration. During the Biden administration, we spent less money on Afghanistan than we did during the Trump administration. So, Biden accomplished us from at least getting out after Trump handed over Afghanistan to the Taliban. Okay, so whatever statements Trump has made subsequent to that, people can sit and they can cite them because it proved. Many people think it was a mistake, but maybe it was a mistake that was less bad than the other mistake of continuing to spend money, for who knows what purpose.
And I would argue,
go ahead,
that both of us would agree that they shouldn't be there in the first place, right? So agree with you. And then even further back, it's just that, but any administration that continues it is at fault for allowing that, as well as the fact that I still argue that there's more relationship with the groups they claim they're fighting than is being presented. But your statement's absolutely correct. I mean, you have to acknowledge the current reality. Like, this is the point we make about Trump and what he's doing in general, being more extreme than, anything I've seen before, but not being different in essence than what's happened, but he's just doing it in an extreme, clumsy, obvious, intense way. So it's similar, but he is doing it to a degree that's more bombastic. That's completely fair. I think that's just Trump's nature.
Yeah. So instead of us having a conversation that, yes, we should be glad. I don't know. Do the American people want to go back into Afghanistan? I don't think the American people want to go back in Afghanistan.
I don't think we really left, Jeffrey. And that's a different conversation, but I actually genuinely don't think, like, whether we're talking about mercenaries like Blackwater types or there are actually just personnel that we can prove on the ground, but not in the sense of like deployment in war. But other countries deal with the same kind of thing where there's a very minimal presence, but they use proxy forces and other groups they work with, as well as their more, behind the scenes stuff. So, with the base statement, I think that kind of made it clear to me that they never really left. And what do you think about that?
I don't know. Is it possible that we have proxy forces there?
I know we do, but
we seem to use proxies everywhere. So you're right. We seem to never really leave anywhere. We give the appearance that we've left, but we've gone underground with our efforts. So and we won't get informed of what our efforts really are until somebody has enough information to actually to disclose, present something that they can disclose. I think we saw that Kristi Noem, from what I read, has now acknowledged that they ignored the court order with respect to the plane. So she just said, that she ignored it. We now have, the allegations that there was a second strike against people where allegedly that Hegseth said, kill them all. He's denying it, but it seems to me that the military has to have videos of it, and it's very easy. Like we've never heard the audio of the alleged payment of $50,000 to Tom Homan, because you don't need to have a conversation. All you need to say is, here's the audio, and the American people could decide for themselves. But they want to tell us what to think rather than giving us the information for us to decide for ourselves. So, the government has not